In this video, I'll go through the process of creating a materials list for a deck. I'll cover the materials list by room, creating a materials list layer set, and then setting up pricing in the structural member reporting lumber table. Let's get started by using the specific materials list by room for a deck. For those rooms that are labeled as a deck, there is a specific tool to create a materials list for the deck. When you select another room that is not labeled as a deck, that tool does not appear. The room needs to be labeled as a deck to get access to the tool to generate the materials for the deck. The program then generates the materials list for that specific deck room. Let's take a tour of the materials list, and I'm going to begin with what's called the structure member reporting categories. There are 4 available. My default setup is a buy list. You can see there is a cut list that will generate a cut list for all the items. There is lineal length. And then finally there is mixed reporting that will give you lineal length and the extra pieces that are involved. If you're using a buy list, the buy list will gather the information for your items out of what's called the structure member reporting lumber table. And if I broaden the size category and we look at some of the deck planks, you can see that in this case I've got 12-foot deck planks and I'm going to need 28 of those. That information is coming from the structural member reporting table. You can also put your pricing in there. Let's take a look at the structural member reporting table. I'm going to come up underneath my tools, materials list, and then go down to structural member reporting. These are broken out by category. I'm going to focus mainly on the buy list, and I'm going to use the edit button, and let's take a look at some of these elements inside of the list. Inside this lumber table is a listing of all of the specific members you can use. It's oftentimes good practice to maybe go in here and clean this out based on the best price availability and those things you might typically buy. So I'm going to come down and click on the first category here, the 12-foot, which is the 1 1/8 by 5 1/8, and you can see that there is no pricing information in here. I'm going to go ahead and put a price in here of $89, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the 16-footer, and I'm going to go ahead and put in a price for this one at $119. Now you can move these up, increase priority or decrease priority depending on what the best buy is at your lumber store. You'll find other elements in here as I scroll down. I'm going to look for the treated lumber, and we'll just come down here until we find a 2 by 10 by 12. Let's assume that we can put a price in here, and I'm going to put in $22. So a couple of prices in here. You can go ahead and fill this out. You may want to update this periodically for your projects. And then at the bottom, again, I'm using the buy list. At the bottom is information specifically for deck planking. So the program goes through and calculates. I have it set to use the longest board. In that case, that longest board is a 16-footer in my list. That will be the longest board it can buy when it's at the 5.5 inch width. Remember, some of those boards are going to get ripped maybe next to the house, so there may be instances where I'm going to get lineal length. There are some options in here that you can choose. In this case, for the buy list, I'm using the longest board available. Also doing that for the rim joists as well. Once I close the structural member reporting table, you can see the pricing is coming in now for those specific boards that we put in there. Some of these boards are not a match. As I scroll down and look at some of the deck planks, you can see that in this case I have one that's 3 1/4 inches wide and also one that's 1 1/2 inches wide. You can always click on this line item and then use the find in plan to locate that inside of the plan. You can see here's where that deck plank is, and I'm just going to turn on that layer for deck planks so it'll be a little bit easier to see all those planks. As you zoom in real close, you can see that one is ripped right up next to the house. So that is why we're seeing that in the materials list for the smaller width for that particular deck plank. As a result of that, it's not going to be using the standard boards from the structural member reporting lumber table. For other elements in your pricing, in this case I've got a concrete footing. I can come in here and I'm going to use $100 for that price, put that in there. You can store commodity related items like concrete into what's called a master list. Now that I have $100 in here, I can use this tool called Update to Master List. That will take concrete for those footings, put it into the master list, and when you open up the master list, as I hover over the tool, you can see that that footing is in the master list at $100. I've got a couple other things in there. Master list is a good place to put those items if you're using commodity-based items. There are other elements as we come down and we look at the horizontal panel that's being used in the deck, and let's just kind of take a 3D overview of what we've got here. So in this 3D view, you can see that we have our railing panel that's going to be used for the deck. In the materials list is my horizontal panel, and if I come into the price in here, let's put in maybe a 125 for the price at 73 lineal feet. That's going to add up pretty quickly, so we've got a $9,000 railing in there. And now when you look at that horizontal panel, let's go ahead and just use the Find in Plan tool here. That'll push us back over into the floor plan view. All of those railings are selected. When you use the Open Object tool, and then I'm going to come down to the components, specifically for the horizontal panel, you can see that price gets pushed in to the pricing information. I could easily put it in here as well as the other location. If I did the same thing maybe for the bottom rail, I could put a price in here. Let's make that a little bit cheaper. Let's put in $15 for that. Then when I return back into the materials list, you see that information came out of that panel, and it's $15 a foot, and it totals up in the total cost column. Now for materials list, there are a few settings. If I come up into the Edit Active view, there are categories that you can restrict this to. Typically when you do the materials list by deck room, it's already going to have the parameter set. You can clear all of these elements out and specifically come in and mark decks and walks. I'm also going to mark foundations since that's the category where the footings and the rebar are located. And then that will make any small adjustments into the materials list. You can also adjust your materials list when we're looking at the layer set. Materials lists have layer sets, and currently it's using the materials list layer set. You can restrict what's being seen in your materials list by modifying your layer set. And I'm just going to make a copy of this layer set. Let's make a copy of it, and I'm going to use the word deck for the materials list for the deck. Once I do that, I can then come over into the material list. In fact, I'm going to select all and turn off all items in here momentarily. You see my materials list blanks out because nothing is selected. Then I'm going to search for deck and turn on only those items for the deck. Now, this can be a nice way to isolate your materials list. If you do a materials list, let's go ahead and save this specific materials list. And we'll just put that in there as deck. And that will show up in your project browser underneath your materials list, so we can always retrieve that back out when we need to. If I do a materials list and come down to the tools and materials list for all floors, this is going to calculate the materials list for the entire project. By simply coming over and switching the layer set to the materials list deck, that layer set will quickly isolate to that specific set of layers that is being used for this deck. So it's another way to isolate your items. You can also come in here if you wanted to and change it, adjust your columns, the appearance, and that sort of information. That's why the coloring may look different on my screen than it's on your screen. So all those things can be customized to generate your materials for your deck. Now, one of the last things I want to do is go back over into the floor plan view, and let's take a look at the deck room itself. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this room. When a room is named a deck, you're going to find the deck information, and here is some information that is going to control the way this deck is being created. At the top is if you want to generate the framing automatically. I've turned it off for this project. if you wanted to keep the deck framing. If you delete the deck room, it will retain the framing. And then the information on the planking. The reason that our plank's 5.5 inches is because that information is spelled out here. The max plank length, as I slide this over, when you look at the floor plan view, you see these separations between each of the planks. I've got that set up to be at 16 feet. Typically a good idea to maybe match that with your materials list. Won't be exact because I know you'll probably be cutting it to offset your planks, but this will allow you to generate your materials list a little bit differently, give you a little more control. The gap for your planking, the border planks, and then the joist information down below it. On the deck support panel, if you look at the beam spacing or the edit beam dialog in here, this allows you to specify the information about that structure member. You'll find the same thing for your posts and your footing information. All of these things add up to creating a deck materials list.